Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our fourth week of our midweek live stream. We're so excited to have you here with us online. We encourage you to interact through the comments and to interact with our online host this evening, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook. But this week, we are going to be recapping and talking about this theme of being conflicted based off the story of Pilate and Pastor Patrick's sermon series, So Close, Yet So Far.
Yeah, I was really excited when I heard the topic of last week when we were talking about it, and then when I heard the message. Pilate, I tell you, I've always sort of looked at him and almost related to him in a certain way because he was conflicted. Surely in the scriptures we see over and over how he constantly said repeatedly that he finds nothing, he finds this man innocent. He didn't find anything wrong with him. And basically he was trying to get out of it. He was trying to get out of being the bad guy there, which is, I guess ironic in a sense because the other things historically that he did as a leader, but he just knew in his own personal convictions that this man was innocent, and he was clearly convicted. And I think through that, as we were talking about today's topic, I think we all can relate to being conflicted, whether it be something minor or something major. I think we deal with those inner struggles every single day. So I'm excited about today's talk.
Yeah, definitely. And with us today for our panel and our discussion, we have two very special guests. The first one being Krista Ballington, who is our lead pastor's wife, but she is so much more than that. She leads on our praise team. She is a part of our prayer team as well, and is an advocate for The Chosen. If you haven't watched The Chosen, she is very excited about it. She will make you excited about it. So ask Krista some questions if you want to know what The Chosen is. The second one here is Sydney Kale. She's one of our young adults and really advocates for our young adult group and connects people that way, but she's a student leader. She works with our iCampus team. She kind of does a little bit of everything. So they're both two wonderful women who are going to be speaking into our topic today.
I got to say that as we set up for today, I feel like I'm on an episode of The View, or either that show Outnumbered, one of the news shows, where they have the women and the one guy. So I don't know. Hopefully I'm the political conservative commentator. I don't know. So
it's not a bad thing to be surrounded by women,
No, I'm sure you guys have some very good opinions about
We do.
Things. And
we do.
I'd like to think so.
Part of this talk, I guess, is opinion, but hopefully we root our opinions in Scripture, and I think we will, and we always do. So anyway, but yes, I'm on the bridge version of The View today.
Like it. All right, so our first question, let's talk about a time where we have felt conflicted, since we're going off of Pilate here. Is there ever a time where you were very conflicted, or even specifically a time where you pushed ahead with a decision that you knew was wrong? And kind of tell us what happened, why you pushed on with that decision, and how you felt when you were conflicted.
You want me to go first? Yeah.
So I have a lot of things that I've been conflicted about in my life. So it's really trying to think, which one do I want to talk about? I guess one that maybe people can relate to the most actually happened not too long ago. Since we've been here, for how many years have we been here? 13 years, something like that. I've been traveling to Athens to work all 13 years.
And what's your job, just so people know?
I work in the hospital. Okay. I work in the NICU, and I am a tech secretary in there. So, and it's a great job. It's a great staff. It's a great management. So there's so many pros to being there. And you never know what you're going to get, when you change jobs. So there's a little bit of fear in jumping into something else because I know I've got it good where I'm at. But there's a lot of cons to being there too, just in the distance and the accessibility of the doctors I have to choose because of my insurance. So there's so many pros and cons. So over the years, there's been moments where I will throw out my applications, to Northeast Georgia or just somewhere around here to try to get me closer to home. And every time I do, I get really unbalanced again. I get really wishy-washy about I don't know if I want to do this. I'm scared to jump into this. I've just been so inconsistent over the years. So recently, I stuck out some applications again to do that. And had some really good feedback from those. I went for interviews, had a really great interview. In fact, my supervisor at work now came to me and she was like, Krista, she said, you are going to get this job. And I'm like, really? Are you saying that just to be encouraging, or are you saying that because you know something? And she says, no, like, I'm saying that because you're going to get this job. I know by the things that she said, you're going to get this job. And I'm like, really? So I left and I was just like, oh my gosh. And I started getting nervous again because I'm like, I don't know if this is what I want. I don't know if this is. And so finally, I just got to a point where I was like, you know what, God, I have no clue what's good for me. I don't know what I want. But you know what is best for me. You know what I need, and you can see the beginning of right now what's going on. You can see what's going to happen in the future and whether this is going to be a good move for me. And you know what? I'm just going to say, I've put it out there. I'm allowing you to do something with what I've done. Now I want you to just either close the door or let me have favor, whichever the case may be. And I really just got at peace with that because, I was like, and I think that comes from just really knowing that you have a relationship with God, knowing who you are, knowing that you really are a child of God and that He really does want what's best for you. Mm-hmm. And so that made it easy for me to just put my trust there. And so sure enough, I get a call one day. I'm out shopping and I get a call from the lady who interviewed me, and she says, Krista, and I said, yes. And she says, so I just want you to know you really, really stood out and you really, really rose to the top in this thing. I just want you to know that. And she says, but for some reason, we just decided last night we're going to go with this other lady. And I was like, I kind of laughed, not after the fact. I kind of chuckled because I knew this really was a direct intervention of God, because based on what my own supervisor said at my current job, she was sure I had the job. And the lady that spoke to me just even sounded a little bit bewildered that she says, you really did, but maybe this other lady might be a better fit. I don't know, but we're going to go with her. But I just wanted to encourage you in that. So, I didn't stress over that. Like, I was completely fine with the fact I didn't get the job because I knew that it was God's choice for me.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, for the last 13 years, I've stayed in conflict about what I want and what I don't want. Mm-hmm. And I finally just really laid it in His hands and said, I don't know, but you know, so just do it.
Man, that's a hard place to be for 13 years. Yeah, that's very difficult.
For sure. Well, I am conflicted all the time because
Same.
I am a rule follower, and
Same.
A lot of the people in my life are not always rule followers. So I feel like I am often conflicted about like small things or just different things along the way. But one instance that really comes to mind when I think about being conflicted is about a year ago when I was going to go into Abante. So for anyone who doesn't know, it is a 9-month mission discipleship and academic program. And it sort of just fell into my lap, but I remember like when I happened upon this, that I was so just internally conflicted on whether or not I should go or I should stay here. And I remember, going through all the different things in my head and being like, okay, I serve in all these areas of the church and I'm just going to up and leave, and all of those spaces are not going to be filled. And I remember telling me, you were like, is God not big enough to fill those spots? Like, do you really think that He is not going to fill your place with someone? And I just remember feeling a lot of peace with that. But I also remember, prior to finding Abante, that I had looked at different programs and other things that were similar to this, where I, felt conflicted and wanted to apply, and nothing ever worked. My parents never were okay with it, and there were so many like walls that I needed to jump over. And so I remember like just always feeling so like down on it and never, feeling like it was the right decision, but knowing inside that I needed to do something different. So it was funny because when Abante came, it was like the perfect thing, but I still felt conflicted, just because, I guess I felt like I knew better than God for what was in my life, which wasn't true, and everything just kind of fell into place, and I was able to get funding and all of these different things where he just like confirmation after confirmation, like Krista was saying, she just felt at peace in her spirit. And like when I kept getting confirmations, I began to, feel that peace, and almost like the resolution of my conflict was happening just through like the things that he was doing, like the doors that he was opening in my life.
Yeah, I think that's good, and especially for if there's any students or young adults listening, I think that really speaks to a lot of them, because so many of them, I mean, especially if you're a senior and you don't know what's happening with your senior year, or much less your freshman year of college, it's such a difficult time when you're choosing a big life step like that, feeling so conflicted, but really, ultimately, God always brings peace and resolution at some point, and really it comes down to a point of our surrender of God, what's your will? Where do you want me to go? What do you want? What job do you want me to be in? That I think our resolution really comes.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, because I remember like basically audibly hearing him say to me like, do this, go. And I still remember like fighting with myself, like there are like just making excuses almost and not being willing to just surrender and be obedient. But I remember the peace that I felt when I decided to do that. Like I still remember getting on the airplane and honestly not even being afraid. Like I remember landing in our first location and like not even, being upset or crying or anything like that. I just had so much peace about the whole thing.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the toughest things at times is hearing the voice of God and knowing which voice is speaking.
Yeah.
There's been so many times in my life where I've had, like all of us, I've had plenty of moments of conflict within my life that I'm just wondering if it was God or if it was me or if it was the devil, or because the voices get louder and louder in your head and you wrestle with them. Several moments of conflict in my life. One was just where to go to college, because I wanted to play ball for the University of Georgia, but I had scholarships at smaller schools and all that. So I wrestled with that. I don't know if that was just God or just my own personal whatever. Probably the most notable in my adult life was when I had a job of 10 years working at a bank, had a good job, good people, worked with good people, but God had opened up this door of ministry through my group, Julian Drive, that ended up getting signed to a record deal, and and publicity came and things like that, and we had the opportunities, but giving up the comfort of a good job, that was tough and that was hard, and listening to God and hearing from God during that was tough, because I knew it was going to be a major financial sacrifice, but I'm with you. When you feel like God's really prompting you, that became easier. I was excited. To cut my salary in half, and just say, I'm going, man. I saved up all this money for all these years. I'm going to help fund the ministry, but it doesn't always happen that way. There's been other times in my life where it's a major conflict, and that clear voice one way or the other doesn't come, and it's only after the fact that I look back and say, wow, God, you saw this and I didn't see it then. I trusted you with it, but I still struggled with it at the moment. And there's so many instances where I look back after the fact and was like, that was a hard decision, but I know it was the right one.
yeah,
So
I would agree. I even remember at the time I lived in an apartment with Ashton, actually, and I remember we were like packing my things to get them out within because this all happened within 2 weeks. It was like boom,
crazy span.
It was crazy. But I remember we were like packing things, and I would go 30 minutes and then all of a sudden I would just start crying, and Ashton would have to like console me, and then we would pack some more things, and I would cry again, and like so I remember it was not easy, but looking back on it, I'm so thankful that I was obedient.
Yeah.
So
Can I put a plug in here too on what you were saying? Just made me think kind of on the flip side of our decisions that we make, sometimes that God is there making decisions for us and doing things that we don't understand, don't even see him doing it really.
Yeah.
But just recently, out of the blue, God just totally opened my eyes and showed me something, and it was like he was speaking to me so clearly in that moment. I wasn't even asking the question. That's what's so cool about it, is that I'm just driving down the road, and literally out of nowhere, because of something else I was thinking about and asking about, he brought something back and put it in this situation and say, this is why. For all of these years, and what I'm referring to is I had tried to go to school for so many years. Like, I kept trying to go back and get my nursing degree, and I kept trying to go back, and it seemed like there was always something that was just, it just never happened. Like, and so, like, when Isabel was little, there's 5 years between my first two, and you know, I couldn't go to school when she was tiny because I carried this weight of guilt about not being with her. But finally, we had been trying to have our second child forever, and it wasn't happening. And so finally, I said, Isabel's a little older, so I'm gonna just try to go back to school. And 5 years now between my kids, and so I went back to school, and literally the first semester in, I find out I'm pregnant with Isaac. And I was like, oh my gosh. Well, I was, of course, excited, but I was just like, wow, after all these years, I go back to school. So I finished that semester. I had the baby. Right after he was born, I said, I'm going to try this again. And I go back in. First semester in, I'm pregnant with my third child. And then, you know, literally after she's born, there's less than a year, you know, there's a year and a few months between the fourth child. And so I was just like, why can't I get, this just is not happening for me. And all the years since then, there were little moments here and there where I would try to go back to school, and there would be something that just sabotaged me, you know. Even in recent couple of years, I sabotaged myself, just legitimately, didn't mean to, but did, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'm driving down the road recently, and God just brought that back. And to tell you the whole story of how he showed me this is a story for another day. But the point is, he showed me in that moment, out of nowhere, he pulls this back and he says, you've asked yourself for years, why didn't this happen? Why didn't this happen? Why didn't this happen? He said, this is why it didn't happen. It was him saving me from myself, from showing me that had I completed that, had I gotten my degree, and he just showed me this whole cycle of things and decisions that I would have made that would have brought me to a different place in life. And it was so clear to me. It was just so amazing because he showed me, it was like he saved me from what I thought I needed, from what I thought I wanted.
Yeah.
For this other moment and for this other thing that he needed from me. And it was just so powerful to me because it did just come out of nowhere. And so it's one of those things where sometimes we don't realize God is on the other side trying to shift things to help us, and we don't recognize it and we don't know it. But now, you know, he can show you those things in the ways that he's directed your life. You
Yeah.
know? So.
Yeah, and you know, it kind of brings me to another question. Like, I'm sure you had people speaking into your life of, Krista, go for this degree, Krista, do this thing. You know, the world is telling you that's success. So what do we do when we're conflicted spiritually? When, you know, maybe your peers or the world or you know, your job or your status keeps you in conflict with, you know, fully following Jesus or putting your faith in him or trusting what he has for your life. What do you do when, I guess, the world and your faith are at odds and you're conflicted that way?
I'm going to jump in on this one. Mainly with you being the youth pastor, of course, you're in the care of at least one of my kids, and then will be soon for two of my others. I try to explain to them now, especially at their age, their ages, to me, the youth pastor and kids pastors have one of the most important roles in church. I mean, because you're catching these kids and trying to get them on the right path, because ultimately when they get older, they get high school, right out of high school, they have a decision to make. Are they going to stick with the faith that was planted in them, or are they going to go a different direction? And so I'm constantly reminding them, and I tell them, even Tyler at his age, I'm like, look, I can't prevent you from going places totally. You're going to be getting in college soon. You're going to be doing this. Whether you go to a Christian school or a non-Christian school, there's going to be decisions that you face. And it's up to you to decide what path you're going to take. Because ultimately, Christianity, following Christ, is at odds with the world and with the way the world says to do things. The world says that certain things are okay, and we know in our spirit it's like, yeah, but that's contrary to what I've been taught. And it's not that Jesus is a rule maker just because he likes to make rules and be a stern, mean dad. It's because he's protecting us from our own self, from, protecting us from pain and suffering, that he knows that ultimately, if we choose to go the way of the world, that we will definitely go through. And as a parent, you want to say, listen, I made some of those bad decisions at some point in my life, and let me tell you what happens. At the end of the day, they have to experience some things themselves, and they'll see we were right. Like I told you, but you have to steer them properly. Now, and as you get older, of course, we're still at odds with what the world says, culture says, and all that. I think at this place in life, the decision making is not as hard as when you're a teenager or when you're a kid. It just isn't. And I think we all, as you get older, you guys are knowing that now, and definitely Krista. But that's mainly what I would speak into that question. Anybody else?
I guess I would just kind of add to that. Like, I agree. I remember being in high school and, dealing with some of those decisions that come at you just from your peers and things. And I'm so grateful that I was raised in church and did have the faith background with that, because I feel like it made my decisions a little easier. But I still remember, being conflicted with, like, do I give in to this peer pressure? Like, what is this going to look like for me on the other end? Are they going to stop being my friend if I don't do this or whatever? But I will say that as I've gotten older, it's been a lot easier for me to know, what I believe and stand firm in my values. And I think that has a lot to do with learning on your own. You experience God, and you eventually, develop your own faith and walk in that. And those decisions do become a little easier. But
I'm just sitting here thinking, the hardest thing, knowing that you're trying your hardest to follow God and what he teaches, is when there is pain and when there is not just discomfort, but legitimate, like, real problems,
Right.
And even just looking at the young people and trying to counsel them through the way our culture is now, and how normal it is for people to, live together before they get married, or, whatever. It's so normal, and it feels so right, because you care about a person and you want to know that everything's good. You don't want to, and the culture has just become that, to where it's hard to go back on this ancient book and say, this is the guideline. But the truth is, God doesn't change, even when our culture changes. And, I had one of those moments sitting, I still refer to this because it was so powerful in my mind. I was arguing with God, and I was like, God, is this really what you expect of me? And is this really? And immediately I was like, okay, I'm sorry I asked that question. Because it was like he said, look at what I did for you.
Yeah.
Look at the sacrifice I made for you. And really, when you line it up with that, he's like, yes. When he tells us to love people, that's the definition of love, is sacrifice. And so, yes, this is what I expect from you. And I was like, that's not the answer I wanted, God.
Yeah.
But it is. It puts your whole being into conflict with what you know is right. It just doesn't feel good sometimes. But we know it's right, and it does bring us to a better place when we walk through that, because it makes us better, and it doesn't always, it won't stay difficult if
Yeah.
you push through it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And looking at this story of Pilate, ultimately, Pastor Patrick outlined his struggle between choosing the truth, being conflicted between the truth of who Jesus was and his ability to have power still in ruling as a governor, because his people were turning against him. And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, would God really ask him to give up his power? And a lot of us, I think, would be offended by that. Like, if I had this position, would God ask me to give that up? Even if he gave it to me and put me there? And I think, yeah.
Yeah, you're just appalled, like, really? And really, I've literally stood in my living room before going, really? Like, really? Like, I don't comprehend, I can't understand that this is really, you would ask me to, and he does, sometimes he asks us to do hard things, but.
Yeah. And even, I think with dealing with students a lot, and just the culture, the way that it is, our highest value is like self-gratification and self-happiness. Like, if you're not happy, then change your life. And God wouldn't cause you, ask you to do something that would make you unhappy, right? And that's not true, because the Christian life isn't about being happy and, choosing what's best for you. Like, it's about living for God. And ultimately, I think you're right, it's about sacrifice.
But I want to put in something there where you say the Christian's life's not about being happy and all that. That is true. It is about us sacrificing for other people. But one thing that I feel like we have to be careful of, because you do have people out there that until those things are revelations, there are some simplistic things about Christianity that it's only just like dawned on me in the last couple of years. Like, it's one of those duh moments, and it's the very basics of why Jesus went to the cross kind of things. It's like, these things, but it doesn't really settle in your spirit and your heart to where you really get it. And I think when we say those things, when we say Christianity is not about being happy, and Christianity is, that's a very negative thing. The way people outside that just don't get that are going to take that really negatively, because, well, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And the truth is, the point that you're trying to make, or that I'm trying to make, is that the ultimate thing is sacrifice. That's what Christianity, we sacrifice, and sometimes that doesn't feel good. But the other side of that, there is joy.
Yeah.
There is happiness. That is the essence of who God is. He's joy. He's full of joy. He's full of love. He's full of, and that comes through obedience, though. That comes through that sacrifice. So even though right now in this moment we may not be happy and it may be difficult, that's our humanity. And if we can push through that, there is happiness, there is joy that you can't really describe and you can't even explain. Sometimes you have a joy in the middle of the worst mess in your life, and people look at you and they're like, how can you be so, it doesn't make sense to have the joy that you carry. You know what I mean? But it does come. So there's another side to that sometimes we don't push the point far enough to make people get, it's not about our happiness, it's about our sacrifice. But it does bring you joy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good clarification. Thank you for saying that. I guess I would say it's not, we give up a momentary happiness for a long-term and ultimate joy that's found outside of ourselves in the person of Jesus. It's a much better way. Thank you for clarifying that. Sorry, were you going to say
No,
something? Okay.
I would agree with that. That's what I was going to add too, is, I definitely think it's joy, which I think you hit on. Rather than the momentary happiness.
Sad and happy are emotions.
Yeah.
Everybody has them.
Joy is...
Christians have them. People that aren't Christians have them. They come and go. I mean, one day you may be happy, one day you may be sad. Joy is that underlying peace that lies underneath it all that says, I'm going to be okay even though I'm not happy today.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good solid foundation to put it on.
So a lot of people in our world right now, I think, are dealing with the conflict of how do I handle my faith when there's this very real pandemic and suffering, and trying to reconcile the two of those. So what would you guys say to somebody who blames God for a crisis such as the coronavirus, or for allowing good people to suffer during a crisis?
Yeah, I think that's a question that people have struggled with forever. And I think people that are either atheists or agnostics or whatever, they're like, well, how can I believe in a God that allows babies to starve in Africa or allows abuse and allow all these things? And the fact is, the question is not as hard to answer really as I think people want to make it. People just don't like the answer. Mm-hmm. And the answer is, as far as my view goes, God did not create us to be his robotic people. He created us to be individuals, to have our own minds and our own hearts, and be able to make our own decisions. And so when we made our own decisions, starting all the way back to the Garden of Eden, we found out quickly that we're corrupt by nature. I mean, we're not perfect. We make bad decisions. And so when we make bad decisions, that caused mankind to fall. Sin entered the world. And when sin entered the world, that just changed everything. No longer was God's perfect Garden of Eden a perfect Garden of Eden. It was a fallen world. All of a sudden we have sickness, disease, and all those kind of things because of what we did. God didn't do that. And so now does God take moments like when Jesus was on the earth? Did everybody on the earth get healed when Jesus was here? No, they didn't. He healed a lot of people. And that was so that God's presence and God's power could be manifest and seen that he is real and he can do that, just like he still does that today. But at the end of the day, people still have the opportunity to choose, and we live in a fallen world to where that fallen world and our human nature has created all these other things because we're not living in a perfect world. And so until Christ comes back to make it a perfect world, and he will one day, but until that day comes, we got to accept we live in a fallen world. We teach Christ, we teach the Bible, we teach love, but we have to accept that and use common sense when we live in these fallen areas of the world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think something that I always think about in circumstances of people experiencing suffering, or even for myself, like when I'm walking through things, I always try to think, what is God trying to teach me through this? Like, who is he allowing me to be able to minister to after I go through this? And I have a good friend who always says, how can I suffer well? How can I suffer in a way that is going to show people on the other side, there is God in the midst of this. Like, there is no way that they can walk through this without God being in the midst of this. So that's just something that I always think about, like, what is he teaching me through all of this?
Yeah.
So
I see coronavirus, I guess, a little bit from a different perspective. And it actually makes me excited, honestly, because one day I was sitting there and I was thinking, I just see God all in this, like, because I see it as a point of maybe God is using this to help us, like, to, number one, recentering our focus, but also, there's so much good that's coming out of this. People that are constantly on the go, that never slow down, that never take a break, that it's like you're being forced to, number one. But number two, I'm looking at all of the habits that have to be broken. Like, we get in routines and habits that's our routine and that's our habit. And we're never going to change. We're just going to keep going down that road. And it's forcing us to change some of those things. But also, I said the other day, it's kind of like somebody that's, what am I trying to say, exercise. A trainer, a physical trainer, will tell you when they set up a training session with you and they give you this whole repertoire of what you're going to go through to get yourself in good physical shape, they'll tell you, I want you to do this for this certain period of time, but you can't do that forever and ever and ever and grow. Like, your body gets used to it, and after a while you have to change that up.
Yeah.
And even for myself, I've looked at these disciplines, spiritual disciplines that even I have put in place, and I think these are good for me, and these are the things that I do, and I do them because I like to, I do them because they're good for me, I do them. But at the same time, sometimes they start to become just a routine, And it's forcing me to think out of the box. It's forcing me to create new things and new disciplines and new habits to build my spiritual self up. And when otherwise I wouldn't have done it, you know, were I not put in this place. But it's bringing out people's creativity. Zoom's been around forever, true. But did people use it to the degree that we're using it now and making use of it? And I would dare to say that even when all of this is over, I bet our iCampus interaction is going to be different from what we've had in the past, because now we know we can take it a step further, and people like having the interaction. You know, there's just little things that are going to change because we were forced to break those habits for a period of time.
Yeah.
And I really do. I see God all in that, because I see God making it for our good.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. I think I would definitely respond and say that God brings good out of the worst situations. Like, that is one of my favorite characteristics of God, is he can take the crappiest, most terrible thing that has ever happened and bring such good from it. But I would almost back up a step and make sure that they understand that even though God works good from it, he doesn't cause it either.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I think so many times we can say, well, God did this and he's bringing good from it. No, I think it happens and, you know, he brings good from it. And I was listening to a sermon on Sunday, actually, about the verse where Jesus goes and Lazarus has died and he weeps with the people. And I think that's such a good illustration of how God feels towards suffering. Jesus knows that he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knows that this is going to happen and it's going to be a great joyous occasion, but he doesn't like death and suffering any more than we do. And he always promises to bring good, but he doesn't cause it. It's an unfortunate side effect of our own decisions and of the way that we've created this world to be instead of how God created it to be, you know?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it on Sunday in our Zoom group, actually, but, you know, this idea that God is a big God and that it's okay. You can get frustrated and he is right there with you. He understands your frustrations, and, you know, you can yell and cry and scream just like you can with your parents or your dad here on earth, you know. I feel like you can also do that with God, and he is going to wrap his arms around you and still say, I love you, and we'll get through this, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Sydney, you mentioned Zoom Church. Well, I'm going to put that in here now. I think it always does us good as a staff to try to get feedback from our people. Did you like Zoom Church? If you did, send us a message in the message box there. Send us a private message or something to let us know how you liked it. What we're doing here on Wednesdays, what you like about it, what you think we could do better. Because I enjoy having conversations with different people every week and making it really about all of our lives, not just hearing from us, but hearing from other people. So just kind of throwing that out there. Y'all continue to communicate with us. We're getting good feedback, you and I are, about having these conversations on Wednesdays, and just kind of tweaking this as we go, because we may be doing this for a while. You know, we're all praying that this coronavirus is contained quickly and all that. But there again, we live in that fallen world. We can't. We're going to pray for it and believe God for it and believe that God's doing big things through it. And I believe he is. Even within our church, I believe he's doing big things. It's forced the church to slow down a little bit and remember what we're really here for, and that's to love one another, help each other through this season, and get more creative with our technology. And by the way, our tech team continues to blow us away. They're amazing. And I'm just happy that I'm part of their team, and we're part of a team together. So anyway, I wanted to throw that in while we're here because you mentioned Zoom Church. So there we go. You guys make sure you message us.
Yeah, if you don't know, if you're unaware of what Zoom Church is, we've been doing a new platform here at the Bridge where we are in Zoom groups using the Zoom video chat platform, getting in groups and watching service together, and then taking communion as groups and discussing. So if you want to be a part of that, you can go to bridgezoom.cc and learn a little bit more. But as we wrap up today with this, topic of conflict. Let's just go around and say, one thing of encouragement or advice that we would say to somebody who finds themselves in conflict, whether that's in and of themselves, with a decision in their life, between the world and God, whatever it may be.
Encouragement, if you lean on the only one that can bring you through that conflict and you trust in the only one that can, you just have to really get that deep down in your heart and believe it, and not just know it in your head, but when you really get to a place where you can believe it and experience it, that conflict becomes a lot more tolerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add to that, keep pressing in, and just keep doing the things that make you feel more connected to God. Keep reading your Bible, keep listening to worship music. We're in our houses a lot right now, and some of us may feel alone, some of us may feel like our family is on top of us, but just keep having quiet time and doing the things that make you feel connected with God, because that ultimately will be what gets you through times of suffering and conflict and all of that.
Yeah. And I would say just continue to trust that God is working in the background, even if you don't see him. That's difficult, but you can still trust that God is working in the background and still be frustrated and not understand at the same time. So allow yourself to feel that frustration, to not understand why you're conflicted and why it hasn't come to resolution, but to still trust that God is working and God will bring good.
Yeah, all those are great answers, and I've times of conflict in my life, I've tried to maintain and do a lot of that, all of that, really. One thing I found in my life spiritually is a discipline that I did not really study very much until I was an adult, much farther down the road of my faith. And we probably don't talk about it a lot here, and that's fasting. Scripturally, we see Old and New Testament, a lot of the scriptures that refer to prayer and fasting. We're good at the prayer part, and a lot of times it's really talking about food, but people talk about fasting other things, and that's important too. But fasting is really removing that thing from your diet to make you allow you to. Sometimes we put so many obstacles in our life that's why people say you need to fast Facebook, or you need to fast TV, and that's not really a fast is really talking about food, but that is a good spiritual practice that's just like fasting that I would encourage anybody and everybody to do for a season or a period of time. Say, you know what, I'm going to go this next week, and I'm not going to do video games, or I'm not, for whatever your thing is, I don't do video games, or I'm not going to get on Facebook. That would be a huge one for people, or students. I'm not going to get on, is it Instagram, or is
or
it
TikTok or whatever.
TikTok. Boy, I'm behind.
You don't even know about TikTok? Oh my.
But my point is that we have so many things that take priority over our time with Christ that no wonder we can't hear his voice. And so I think taking that spiritual discipline of removing something that we've perhaps put it in front of God, and for a lot of us it is food. It's maybe you need to cut out sweets for a month, or cut out bread, or whatever. There's a lot of different fasts in the Bible that we could, as a staff, we could help point you in the right direction. So I think doing that, sometimes when we remove all those obstacles, all of a sudden God's voice gets a little bit louder. And we can hear him a little better. So that's a big one for me too. And I can tell you in my life, whether it be coming to a big decision, writing music, a lot of times I just get this writer's block. I just don't feel like I'm hearing anything from God. And I go through these seasons of 21-day fasts or 10-day fasts, and all of a sudden God's speaking to me, and I'm writing music, and I'm pouring out things like that. And it's in my life. It's amazing how what Scripture talks about, if you actually put it to practice, it works.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
definitely. Well, thank you guys for being here, and thank you for joining us online. If you have any comments or questions about things that we said, you can leave that in the thread, or you can private chat our iCampus hosts. That should be on there right now. And we just want to say thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you here next week again for our midweek live stream.